Okay, hi everyone, and welcome back to Tricycle's second meditation group. If this is your first time joining us, our meditation group is a new offering for subscribers. I'm James Shaheen, Tricycle's editor-in-chief, and I'm here today with Sharon Salzberg, who will be leading the meditation, followed by a Q&A this time. I'd like to say again that this is a bit of an experiment. Your feedback will help us determine the frequency and format of future meditations. So please write us at feedback@tricycle.org with any suggestions. A few notes before we begin. Today we're in a Zoom meeting, so participant video is on. We have disabled your microphones for now, but we will make sure this function is available later. Actually, the questions will be written, so we will not do that. But for the first 30 minutes, Sharon will give a talk and lead a meditation, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. So most of you likely know who Sharon is. She is the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, a good friend of mine, and a best-selling author in that order. Her latest book, Real Life, The Journey from Isolation to Openness and Freedom, is now out in paperback. So she'll be perhaps drawing from that book today. So learn more about her work at SharonSalzberg.com. At this point, I'll turn it over to Sharon. Sharon?
Hi, so that's one of my proudest accomplishments. I'm a friend of James's, and Sam's and other people at Tricycle. So hello. And it's so much fun for me. Oh, here's my friend from Salzburg, Austria again. The reading where people are signing in from, just to get a sense of really, it's a really global gathering, and how beautiful that we come together to practice together. So his book, Real Life, as we talked about last week, is about a journey from a time or a feeling of being constricted and trapped and held back to openness and connection and freedom. And so last week we talked about and practiced some concentration, which is not the same as being constricted and held back and trapped. And today I want to go on to talk about those times and how to work with some of the repetitive patterns that may arise for us. I'm being prompted to speak in Italian, which I can't. And now my microphone has changed. There we go. How to work with some of the habitual patterns that may well arise. So we all go through times where forces arise in the mind, depending on how we relate to them, have the potential to really limit us and hold us back and cause us suffering. These forces, in one of the beautiful quotations from the Buddha I always go back to, where he said, "The mind, your mind, my mind, is naturally radiant and pure. The mind is shining. It's because of visiting forces that we suffer." So these forces like holding on, grasping, clinging, fear, hostility, numbness, delusion. It's so interesting to me that quotation, the Buddha is calling them visitors, which means they come and they go. They arise due to conditions. They're not inherently who we are. They're adventitious. They may visit a lot. They may visit nearly incessantly, but they're still coming and going. And the other thing that was always so poignant for me in that statement was that the Buddha said it's because of these visiting forces that we suffer. He didn't say it's because of these forces that we're terrible people or awful or anything like that. It's because of visiting forces, depending on how we relate to them, that we suffer. So I love that image. From the first time I heard it, I could see myself sitting happily at home, minding my own business. And there was a knock at the door. So I'd get up and I'd answer the door, and there was jealousy or greed or fear. And I might fling open the door and say, "Welcome home." it's all yours, forgetting who actually lives there. Or very commonly, I'd be so ashamed and so freaked out and so upset at the appearance of this visitor that I would shut the door very hastily, try to pretend I never heard the knock, only to have the visitor come in the window or down the chimney or something. It's just not an effective way of actually dealing with a troublesome visitor. So a good deal of the skill we practice in meditation is, what do we do when we hear that knock? We open the door and there's a difficult mind state, a difficult emotion appearing. And we all have our own personal list, but you know the list, for yourself. And again, it's not a problem that they appear. This is just how things are. But how we relate to them will be everything. And all too often we do fling open the door and say, welcome home, it's all yours. Or we are so ashamed and so upset at the appearance of the visitor, we try to deny it, push it away, pretend it didn't happen, and it comes in anyway. So being able to greet that visitor in effect with some balance, presence, even a kind of tenderness or hospitality, not saying come in and take over, but it's okay, you're here. I can handle this. In effect, my awareness is big enough to deal with what's appearing skillfully. So that's what we practice. Perhaps we sit feeling something like the sensation of the breath as a kind of home base, and things happen. Thoughts appear, emotions appear, these forces, these visitors might well appear. It's not the only thing that appears, and we will talk next week a lot about those expansive opening visitors and how we relate to them. But to begin with, we're going to look at what might come up that is more difficult. And so we are practicing that fundamental skill of being able to feel centered, even though something tumultuous is coming up, facing it instead of denying it, not adding to it. And this is really the crucial point about mindfulness. We can connect to what's happening in the moment without adding some of the many things we tend to add. Sense of isolation. I'm the only one who ever feels this. Or projection into the future. This is going to last forever. This anger, this craving, it's the only thing I'll ever feel. Or blame. I knew I should have changed therapists 5 years ago, then I wouldn't be feeling this. Something like that. So we learn to distinguish our actual experience from the add-ons that are just habit. And again, there's no blame for oneself in any of this. We're just saying, oh, this is what tends to happen. Let me orient my attention toward what's actually happening in the moment, instead of getting all entangled in this other stuff, which might actually just come up. We use, let's say the force, the visitor, has a kind of intensity to it, often it will manifest in our bodies. And so that might be the first tack we take. Let's say strong craving comes up while you're meditating. Usually we get very involved in what is it I want and what should it look like, and should I buy it today or wait till tomorrow or whatever. And what we do in the meditation is we pivot. Instead of being so concerned with all of those elements, it's almost like asking oneself, what does strong desire feel like? What does it feel like to want something so much? What does it feel like in my body? So that's the first avenue of exploration. And then we might just watch the play of the craving, because sometimes these feelings are very complicated, or they're compounds, like we might look at strong desire find a lot of loneliness in there, or dissatisfaction with some other arena in our life. We don't know, but we pay attention just to see, like, what is this? What is this feeling? And we watch it change. So we come to a more universal level of understanding of one of the truths of life. Everything changes all of the time. So we pay attention to the experience itself. We distinguish it as much as possible from the add-ons. We pay attention with some balance without judgment. And when we can, we come back to the home base, that primary object. Let's say the feeling of the breath. Some sittings are tumultuous and all kinds of stuff happens. Some are very quiet. It's all good. Whatever happens is okay. There's no wrong experience to be having, because everything in terms of mindfulness depends on how we relate to what is happening. So that's the skill that we're developing over and over again. And for those times you find you're just gone, you're way lost, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. You realize you're somewhere else, see if you can let go, and just come back to that primary object. Okay, so let's sit together. You can sit comfortably. Close your eyes or not. Like, you can start by listening to sound, the sounds of my voice or other sounds. It is a way of relaxing deep inside, allowing your experience to come and go. And even as we like certain sounds and we don't like others, you don't have to chase after them to hold on or push away. Just let them come, let them go. And bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. And bring your attention to the feeling of the breath, just the normal, natural breath. You don't have to try to make it deeper or different, just however it's appearing. And it's really feeling the sensations of the breath. You might also hear your breath or get an image of the breath. But what we're really tuning into is the feeling, the sensation of the breath. Wherever you feel it most distinctly, the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. Find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. If you like, you can use a quiet mental notation of in, out, or rising, falling. But very quiet. It's just a way of supporting the awareness of the breath. It's just one breath. You don't have to be concerned with what's already gone by. You don't have to lean forward for even the very next breath. Just this one. If thoughts or images or sensations or emotions should arise, but they're not very strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. But if something comes up, is very strong, especially if it's one of these patterns, clinging, being afraid, jealous, whatever your own personal list is of those visitors that might tend to come. Remember, it's okay. Everything depends on how we relate to it. You don't have to be upset at how very often this visitor is appearing. It's okay. But can you recognize it in the moment? This is what's happening right now. Take some interest in it. Feel it in your body, perhaps, or watch the play of it. You might try placing a mental label on it very gently. Jealousy, jealousy. But the label is just symbolic of that way of relating. We greet that visitor at the door. We remember they don't live here, but we don't have to freak out. Recognize it, take an interest in it, see if you can let go, and just bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. And for all those, as I said, perhaps many times you're just gone, lost in a fantasy, falling asleep, whatever it might be, it's okay. And recognize that, see if you can let go, bring your attention back to the breath. Any things may come and go. It's okay. And if you ever are uncertain or it feels like it's just too much, there's the breath. Just one breath. And when you feel ready, when you open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the sitting. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. So that's our portion. That's the meditation portion of our time together. We'll now be moving to a Q&A that will last 30 minutes. Please post your question in the chat window and we'll read them out loud. Typically, we would be asking about our meditation practice or other practice-related issues. So please write in the chat what's on your mind, and I'll ask Sharon.
I will say it's so nice to sit with people, even over Zoom.
Yeah, I was looking and we're from everywhere, from Portland to Ohio, Montreal, the UK, Austria, Croatia, everywhere, France.
Everywhere.
Yeah, it's really nice. We're getting some
South Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody asks, and Aaron, you or Sam can answer, is it possible to receive a transcript of Sharon's talks? I think that's up to Sharon, so.
Yeah, well, we are recording these calls and we will provide those. So, yeah, and we can discuss if we can
And
provide
they're
a
also asking
transcript
about
as well.
the previous session. So
Yes.
please put your questions for Sharon in the chat. We have one here. It's okay. Let me see. It's okay to calm the mind for the sit. Is that correct? The thoughts can be addressed as needed later.
Yes, I think that's true. But that doesn't mean that we should dismiss our thoughts kind of, with hostility or distress, like there's so many of them or they're the wrong kinds. We just don't want to elaborate right now. Like I often think of the example of something like a car mechanic who's fixing my car. I want them to really just pay attention in the moment. My life might depend on it, and there's just like doing a craft well, doing something really well and fully. And maybe they're fixing my car and they have all these thoughts about their mortgage or a personal problem at home. They don't have to be upset about that, and think I'm such an awful person, for having these thoughts. It's just like kind of saying, not right now. So I'm not going to try to figure out the resolution to this and what I'm going to do about it right now. And that helps us watch the thought or the feeling come and go and come and go, which will give us a different platform for dealing with these things in our life. We have a little nugget of wisdom to take with us, just at work or in a family situation, wherever that particular pattern arises. We don't have to seize on it like this is forever true, this is coming and going. What do I want to do about it in this situation?
Okay, that question was from Vijaya Putnura. I'll try to include your name. Lisa November asks, I seem to have a lot of add-ons. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That's very possible. And I think, again, it's not easy. I know that, but we don't have to take that personally, and just understand that's the nature of conditioning. And we might have our favorite add-on. Like I'd say mine was probably that sense of isolation. Like I'm the only one, I'm the only one in this room with knee pain. I'm the only one in this room who's falling asleep. I'm the only one. And it's just a habit that we have developed sometimes very strongly. And the ones I mentioned are very common, sense of isolation or projection into the future, like this is the only thing I'll ever feel, or and that's one of the great lessons of developing mindfulness. And remember, it's like a skills training. You know, I don't imagine anyone's really perfect at it right away. You know, it's just like over time and starting over and starting over. We meet what's happening in the moment, and it gets easier to distinguish the actual experience from the add-on. And that's all we really need to do, you know, because the add-on can dissolve if we see it for what it is, and then we can work with the actual experience. The word is, you know, I've talked about many times in teaching in Pali, the language of the original Buddhist text is papancha. It means proliferation. Or as I heard one translator once describe it as the imperialistic tendency of mind, where something happens and the whole world is taken over. You know, anger is, and suddenly we're just lost. For some reason, my default microphone keeps changing. So if I get inaudible, that's why. But you know, we just want to be able to distinguish, say, the arising of the anger from the conclusion we have then drawn about ourselves forevermore because of it. And once we can do that, then we have a greater ability to let go of the add-on. And that's okay. You know, if you feel like a barrage of that stuff, it's all right. Truly, like there's something about introspection in this regard that's also, it reveals everything, and we learn that these things are workable. You know, they're not so massive in truth, because they too are always changing. I want to answer a question that came in earlier. I don't know if it got transferred to you, James, where somebody says, my favorite of your books is Faith, because my favorite is actually Faith as well. I'm wondering if there's anything you would add or change with the perspective of time. And that's a very interesting question, because this year I seem to be doing audio recordings of my books that never had an audio version, not Faith, which does have an audio version. But I faced that very question. I just did the recording for Loving Kindness, which was my first book, which came out in 1995. And it was very much a feeling of meeting the Sharon of 1993, 1994, when I first wrote it. And I kept saying, ooh, you know, like I didn't feel I would change anything, but I would add nuance, you know, and sometimes I used examples like right out of the Buddhist psychology that I don't disbelieve at this point at all, but I might have just added more subtlety, you know, to it. So, for example, when in the Buddhist psychology, when they talk about aversion, which is usually anger or fear, it's pushing against what's happening, trying to declare it to be untrue. They also use the word grief. And these days, or, you know, since 1993, somewhere in there, I would say that doesn't mean the Western psychological understanding of grief. It really is that protestation, wanting to, this is not true. I can't accept that this is at all true, to distinguish it from what would be a very natural process of grieving. But I didn't make that distinction back in 1993 when I was writing the book. I just said anger, fear, grief. And so reading it, I was like, oh, you know, that's a little bit stark, you know, not untrue, but stark. And I actually had asked permission at one point to add a sentence to something, and Shambhala Publication said no. So it is what it is. But with Faith, because it really is my own story so much of my own faith journey, I don't think I would really change anything. Yes, James, go ahead.
Okay, somebody points out that it's difficult to hear me, so I'll speak up. They're building a skyscraper down the street from me, so there's nothing I can do about that. Richard Citron writes, Sharon, thank you for the meditation. In building on your session last week on concentration, I'm thinking I need to give myself longer meditation sessions than my usual 15 to 20 minutes. What are your thoughts about the connection between length and quieting?
I think there can be a connection actually between length of sitting practice, or it could be walking practice. It's like some formal, dedicated period of practice, and the sense of quieting the mind. I think, on the other hand, concentration is a platform, and it's also, of all the qualities we're developing, it's in a way the most ungovernable, because if someone is building a skyscraper, for example, right outside your window, and they haven't started construction yet, and you're sitting in the morning and it's getting very quiet in your mind, and then you hear the sound, very likely your concentration will be disrupted. And so we can't control all those elements. And the most important ability, say you hear the sound, you get massively annoyed. Like, why did they start so early in the morning? Is to be able to meet that annoyance and to be more balanced with the annoyance. You know, all the ways that we were talking about earlier. So we don't we don't set the scene so there's maximum disruption, you know, like we don't necessarily play the radio and scroll Twitter while we are um trying to concentrate, you know, on our breath. But things happen externally or internally. And so uh if you are particularly wanting to deepen concentration, you might try, as your intuition told you, see if you could sit for half an hour, um, for example, and see what happens. But if you get sleepy, or you know other things arise, or there's noise and your concentration's disrupted, it's not sort of the ultimate goal.
Sharon, I have a question you can answer quickly. Sonal Shah asks if you have your meditations available on audio. I think that's what he means by audio, audible.
Inaudible.
Yeah, where's the best place to go to listen to your meditations?
I think if you go, I don't know if my meditations are on Audible or not, but if you go to my website, which is SharonSalzberg.com, there's a tab, I think kind of inelegantly named a store. And you can access, for example, courses I've done with Tricycle in the past. But the meditations are free. They're or maybe for a donation or something like that. So you can get them there.
You can also go to dharmaseed.org, and there are lots of meditations there, including a lot of your own, I believe. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how many guided, there might be some guided meditations. Dharma Seed is another nonprofit that was established many years ago that recorded, with differing degrees of quality, like all the talks, for example, that were delivered at the Insight Meditation Society, which is right through the woods here. You know, so it's me and Joseph and the Dalai Lama for when he was here, and our teachers like this woman Deepa Ma. I mean, you can hear all of these talks there.
Okay, so Kim asks, when you mentioned use more than one object to focus, could you explain, please?
Well, that can mean different things. We make a distinction between what we call the primary object, which is home base. That's what maybe the feeling of the breath is. It's the thing we start with, the thing we keep coming back to. And then we have what we call predominant objects. So you're sitting, feeling the breath. Some little dwippy thing comes up, you know, a mild emotion or something, but it's not really pulling at you. You can just stay with the breath. And then something comes up with a bang. It's much more intense. it becomes the predominant object. You don't sort of try to stay with the breath. It's not wrong to leave the breath because this other thing is now predominant. Let's say it's an emotion. Let's say it's a difficult emotion. That's what we've been talking about, is like, how do you use that as an object of mindfulness? And only after a little bit of time come back to the breath. So another meaning, and I'm not sure which direction you were going in, is that sometimes the breath doesn't work as that primary object. We have physical problems, like I have asthma, which is why I'm coughing, or people have different emotional issues with the breath, and it's not really a resting place for the mind. And so there are substitutes that are perfectly fine. It's not like secondary practice. It's fine to use these other objects rather than the breath. And sometimes that is not just one thing, but I think the example I used was an instruction they gave in Burma, where it's like a rotation. First, you notice what you're seeing, even with your eyes closed. There may be something you see in your visual field. Then what you're hearing. So it's seeing, hearing. Then you flash on your whole body, like your posture. That's the note of sitting. And then touching, where you rest your mind on a touch point, the area maybe the size of a quarter, where your body, maybe your hands are touching, your hands touching your knee, or something like that. Your body's in contact. So it's seeing, hearing, sitting, touching. Or it might be you use something like listening to sound only, or another sensation in your body rather than the breath. So it really could be many things that form the primary object, that home base.
Okay, Sharon, we have a question from Lori Allen. She writes, anxiety. I watched it and experienced it as an observer during the meditation and remained calm. How do I learn to do this in the moment?
First of all, that's great, and it's the confidence that we can do it. And it's not a question of somehow figuring out not how to have it never arise, because that isn't always the case that we can do that at all. But we can learn to be with what's going on in a different way. So from the Buddhist psychological vantage point, anxiety is an energy imbalance. It's not pathologized. It's not denigrated, as like a terrible thing, but it's considered an energy imbalance. It's like there's too much energy in our system for the amount of calm or concentration. And so just being able to observe it, that holding environment will shift the balance so that it's being experienced in a way that we're not adding to the agitation, but creating a kind of calmer environment that is being with it, and that will help the balance. And you can do it in the moment, being aware. I know it's complicated because we're in conversation, or we're busy, or we're responsible for something, or we're in traffic, something's happening, that makes it more complicated to just tune into your body, realize what's going on. Remember that all those add-ons, I've got to get rid of this. I can't believe this. What if it gets stronger? I'm not going to, only make it worse. So it's all the same skill that we take from the meditation practice, that formal practice, into life. And we can do it. We really learn how to do it. I will also say, there are a lot of practices that people have researched in this day and age, like breathing in different patterns, basically things like if your out breath is longer than your in breath, although there are many styles of doing this, but that's the basic thing. If your out breath is longer than your in breath, then your parasympathetic nervous system will start taking over from your sympathetic nervous system, and your blood pressure is likely to go down and anxiety is likely to recede some. And so sometimes we do that, if it's really strong and you feel you got to do something, to not get further lost in it. And then we also apply antidotes like that.
Okay, Sharon, let me see. Willifred Houndschmidt asks, is there a goal to practice?
I think there is a goal to practice, but depending on our conditioning, we might use the idea of a goal kind of unskillfully. And it's also important to understand a kind of correct understanding, to have a correct understanding of a goal. So in my earlier practice, for example, I got it into my head, I don't even know how, that the purpose of practice, like good meditation, looked like sitting bathed in brilliant white light. And I don't have any white light. I had a lot of painful things that were actually quite important because I was 18 years old. I'd never been in therapy. I'd never really looked at these things before. And it was actually very important that I see them. I also had a lot of experiences that were kind of experiences of release or peace, even with difficult things going on. But I denigrated everything because it wasn't white light. And it was just it took a long time for me to understand, oh, that was not the point. That was like a kind of nice experience that sometimes might happen, but then it passed and I was still left with, everything else. And so we can have a very wrong idea of goal. And I'd say the most common thing I hear from people, say if I'm introduced as a meditation teacher and they say, oh, I tried that once, I failed at it. I say, well, why do you think you failed at it? And they almost always say, because I couldn't stop thinking. I couldn't make my mind blank. I couldn't make all thoughts go away. Which is not really a goal, because you can have tons of thoughts, but not be caught in them, right? And not put yourself down for them, or, you can have a very different relationship to those thoughts, which is actually the point. But the more we have a mistaken idea, then we freak out. It's not happening. Why isn't it happening? It's happening for everybody else. So I'd say, we all maybe have a slightly different sense of what that goal might be. But for me, it came to be something about having a different relationship to all the many things that arise in my own experience. So I didn't feel so caught. I didn't feel so overwhelmed. And I also didn't feel so fragmented, all of the time. And that was a realistic goal, thank goodness, Um, yeah, so I think we can each assess that.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Jane Terzis asks, thank you so much, Sharon. I had quite a few visitors during that meditation. I think you're suggesting that we acknowledge the visitor and name it, i.e. comparing, but not to engage, not to welcome it, just move back to the breath, let it go. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's great. And I'm glad you said you had quite a few visitors, because sometimes I give an instruction like that and I think, what if I have nothing happening? Like totally quiet sitting, because that can happen too, but so that's good. The only thing I would add is that we can welcome the visitor to a certain extent. You can take something of an interest in it, and even be cordial. Like I once there's this Tibetan Buddhist practice. So in a vast oversimplification of it, they would say, invite that visitor in for a meal. Like invite your demon in for a meal. Don't let it have the run of the house because that's dangerous. So if that's what you mean by welcome, yes, absolutely. We don't want to say, yeah, it's all yours, take over. But we don't have to be so upset, so ashamed, so freaked out at the appearance of this visitor. You can say, okay, come in. I'm going to keep an eye on you. But we can have even a little warmth there. So I once suggested that with a group of people, and someone in the group didn't like it. So I said, okay, how about inviting them in for a cup of tea? And they said, how about a cup of tea to go? And I said, okay, if that's the extent of the hospitality, that's fine. So the idea is really the interest, because we do see many things. I've looked at anger and I've seen, maybe so much sadness in there, or so much of a sense of helplessness. And I've seen how, it seems so permanent when it arises, but it's actually changing all of the time. It's ebbing and flowing. And I've looked at desire and seen a lot of loneliness. That's why I use those examples. So we can't be all consumed with what am I going to do about it? And, how am I going to accomplish it? Or how am I going to get rid of it? But like, what is the feeling? What's going on right now? And that would be fine. And then we go back to the breath. Or if you feel like it's too overwhelming, you can't just be looking at it. You're getting caught. Definitely just see if you can let go and go back to the breath.
Okay, Sharon, one last question. There are just so many questions. I'm really sorry we can't get to them all, or even much of a fraction of them. Maybe we can think about longer Q&A sessions after a meditation. But again, please continue to give your feedback. The last question is from RS to everyone. How to overcome resistance to meditating? Even though I know I will feel better after meditating, my first reaction to even thinking about meditation is to procrastinate, avoid it, give myself excuses for postponing meditation.
Okay, I'm going to answer that, but I'm also going to answer a question that came in. Will I be doing a metta-based meditation in a future session? Yes, absolutely. Again, resistance is very tricky. There are lots of options. One is make the resistance, the feeling of resistance, the object of awareness, even if you're not sitting in a formal meditation posture, even if you're refusing to do that, just lying around, thinking I should meditate, but I don't want to. Pay attention to that feeling. It's quite interesting. When we look at boredom, we look at resistance, we look at things like that. You don't have to do a big analysis of it, but what does it feel like? And what's part of it? I mean, for me, those feelings almost always had, for me, a feeling of some kind of fear in that I can't do it, I can't accomplish it, I'll just avoid it. And that was interesting to see, by paying attention. The other option, another option, is really using structure, in some way. Like, I'm the kind of person who's very helped by structure. Not everybody is, perhaps, but for example, when I was living in India, I wasn't always on intensive retreat, and I had a very hard time having a daily practice. Because when I sit and things felt good, I'd think, great, I'm going to live in India for the rest of my life, feeling just this way. And when I was restless, or I was bored, or I was in pain, I'd get up. I think it doesn't work. It only works in a retreat, or I can't do it, something like that. So I went to this teacher, this man named Manindra, and I described that pattern. And he said, for you, I have one piece of advice, and that is just put your body there. He said, every day you put your body there. Some days it'll feel one way, other days it'll feel another way. And that doesn't mean a lifetime commitment, because that would be really onerous, but whatever feels right to you. For 2 weeks, every day, I'm going to practice for 10 minutes, whatever seems right to you. And then you do it. And it might feel wretched, but you just do it. And then at the end of that period, you can assess, oh, was that worth doing? James, you muted.
Sorry about that. We're going to go a little bit over because there's one question I really just do think I should ask. Given our emphasis on stillness and concentration, a few people have asked, what about working with difficult physical conditions like arthritis? Can they move? Can they shift and so forth? I just wanted to get that one in there.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yes, you can move and shift. I would try, if possible, not to do that incessantly. There are ways of there are a few things to keep in mind, and this comes back to another one of my teachers named Saida Upandita, who in counseling people in terms of working with physical pain, which is also a model for emotional pain. He said, don't try to be with it all the time. Don't try to be aware of it all the time. Like, be with it, leave it, be with something that's easier, listening to sound or feeling something else in your body. And then maybe go back to the pain. Not because it's wrong to just be with the pain and be with the pain and be with the pain, but it's exhausting. And we'll lose balance just because we're so fatigued. So we try to build in balance all along the way. You're aware of the sensation, you move your attention to something else. Maybe you're aware of the sensation again, you move your attention to something else. We try not to feel things at a block, like my neck, but to feel moment to moment the rotation, like it's a moment of burning, it's a moment of twisting, it's a moment of this, it's a moment of that. Not that any of that feels good, but that's an alive system. And that's a very different way, as it turns out, of relating to pain. There's one friend of mine with a chronic physical pain condition said to me, I found the space within the pain working in that way. And then when you feel like I cannot be with it in truth, I don't have the energy or it's too much, definitely shift posture. It's fine. Because then that's a new beginning.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next group a week from today, Monday, May 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm sorry, Eastern Daylight Time, isn't it? It's daylight time now, right? Okay, you can join us at the same Zoom link. So this is a new offering, and we would appreciate any feedback you might have to help us improve. Please feel free to email us with questions, comments, and suggestions at feedback@tricycle.org. See you all next week. Thank you.